In the 1950s, Disney animation was built by a brotherhood. Polished, precise. They were icons of ink and order. Their job was to bring dreams to life, methodically. And then there was Rolly Crump. He wasn't polished. He wasn't precise. He was something else entirely. He carved tiki gods with a plastic fork. He pitched a haunted museum Walt Disney thought was too weird to build. And yet, he helped shape the soul of Disneyland. So how does a creative misfit go from sewer manholes and ceramics to rewriting the blueprint of Disney magic? Hey, I'm Calamity Poo, and on this channel we dive deep into the strange, surprising, and sometimes slightly unhinged stories behind your favourite theme parks. Because let's be honest, what goes on behind the scenes is sometimes more interesting than what happens on the screen or on the parks. So if you're into weird Imagineers, corporate drama, design choices that make you go, wait, they built that? Welcome aboard. Now let's talk about the guy who made Disneyland weird. Before Disneyland had pirates, tiki gods, or talking ghosts, it had this. A studio where the carpet was quiet, the pencils were sharp, and no one ever coloured outside the lines. Literally. These were the men Walt trusted with his vision, his inner circle, the 9 old men. They created icons from nothing, Cinderella, Peter Pan, Bambi. They made animation feel real. But they didn't just draw, they calculated, measured, built structure around emotion. Magic had to be functional. Their offices looked like engineering labs, their drawings were diagrams. Their charm came from control. Walt called them Imagineers before that was even a job title. They weren't rebels, they were craftsmen, methodical, exacting, brilliant. And then, into all of this, walked Rolly Crump. No formal training, no polished pedigree, just a portfolio full of strange shapes, weird faces, and colour combinations that made people nervous. He didn't fit, and that is exactly why this story matters. Roland Fargo Crump always knew what he wanted to do. He wanted to animate. Not be famous, not direct, not change the world, just animate. Be part of the machine that made drawings move. But there were 2 problems. He had no formal training, and he had even less money. He grew up in Alhambra, just outside LA, close enough to hear about Walt Disney, but not close enough to knock on the door. So he worked. Ceramics factories, plaster molds, sewer manholes, literal infrastructure. And then after 10 hours of labour, he'd come home and draw. Faces, machines, screaming totems, ideas that didn't look like Disney, they didn't really look like anything. He took night classes in art, and he didn't thrive, but he didn't quit either. Eventually he scraped together a portfolio. The paper was cheap, the art was weird, but he sent it to Disney anyway. And in 1952, someone said yes. They made him an in-betweener, entry-level, frame filler, but to Rolly it was the gates of Olympus. He wasn't a prodigy, but he was inside, and that was enough. There are 2 kinds of people who get hired at Disney. Those who rise through the ranks by following the rules, and those who make everyone in the room uncomfortable. In 1952, Rolly Crump became an in-betweener. It's the most invisible job in animation, filling in the frames between the real art. He didn't stand out, not yet, but if you look closely, his sketches were starting to get weird. While others studied perspective and proportion, Rolly was doodling spirals, jungle gods, melting clocks. The studio didn't know what to do with him, but one person was paying attention. Walt Disney noticed Rolly's work, not for what it was, but for what it could be. In 1959, 7 years after filling in other people's drawings, Walt pulled him out of animation and dropped him somewhere very different. He wasn't promoted, but he was reassigned to the place where Disneyland got built. They didn't know it yet, but they just let the weird in. And look, Rolly was brilliant. Let's not pretend he broke in. Walt invited him, and that really matters. Creative rebellion needs a gatekeeper willing to open the damn gate. That's the part people skip when they romanticize the weirdos. When Rolly left animation in 1959, he didn't climb the ladder, he got rerouted. Wed Enterprises was Walt Disney's private sandbox. It wasn't an office, it was an idea factory, a place where rides were imagined, prototyped, and sometimes scrapped right on the floor. And Rolly fit right into the chaos. His first major project was Rock Candy Mountain, covered quite literally in real candy. Yes, people actually tried to eat it, which pretty much sums up what Rolly was bringing to the table. A sense of wonder, playful absurdity, and no fear of doing something weird just because nobody else was. Next came the enchanted Tiki Room's pre-show area. Disney needed statues, tiki gods that would speak and move. The problem? None of the sculptors wanted the job. Too strange, too out there. But for Rolly, that wasn't a setback, it was permission. So he grabbed the plastic fork, from the Disney cafeteria, and carved the prototypes by himself. And this wasn't just funny, it was important. Rolly didn't wait for approval or instructions. He saw what needed doing, found whatever tool was at hand, and made it happen. That plastic fork wasn't quirky, it was a tiny rebellion against the careful corporate structure Walt himself had built. Disney was used to procedure and polish, but Rolly was about ingenuity and guts, and that fork made it clear the weirdness had arrived, and it wasn't going anywhere. By the early 1960s, Rolly Crump wasn't just part of the team, he was becoming the studio's go-to guy for the odd, the whimsical, the visually unexplainable. So when Disney committed to the 1964 New York World's Fair, Walt tapped in for something big, something visible. The assignment? Create a kinetic sculpture that would tower over the Pepsi Pavilion and mark the entrance to It's a Small World. But this wasn't Rolly's first wind-powered design. He'd already built a hypnotic wind sculpture for a Wed Gallery exhibit, one Walt had loved. So now they asked for something bigger, and he delivered. The Tower of the Four Winds stood 120 feet tall, over 100 spinning shapes powered entirely by the breeze. Rolly didn't design it to tell a story, he designed it to feel like a living thing, a sculpture with its own weather. But when they built it, Rolly hated it. The original design was thin, skeletal, light, but engineering added a heavy steel frame around it, and Rolly said it ruined the whole composition. Still, it worked. Millions saw it, photographers adored it, it became the face of the pavilion. But when the fair ended, It's a Small World went to Disneyland and the tower didn't. No preservation, no relocation, it was quietly dismantled and lost. For Rolly, it was the biggest thing he never built, and it just disappeared. If the tower tested how far Disney would go with weirdness, the Haunted Mansion would push it beyond the edge. In the 1960s, Walt Disney had a problem, and it had a wrought iron gate and a headstone. The Haunted Mansion was years behind schedule. Everyone had ideas, no one had the tone. So Walt handed a section of the concept to the weirdest guy he knew, Rolly Crump. And what Rolly came back with, it scared Walt. Walt literally said he couldn't sleep after looking at Rolly's sketches. That's not a metaphor, he said it out loud. Walt didn't kill the idea, but he redirected it. He told Rolly, don't throw it away, make it its own thing. And so the Museum of the Weird was born, a proposed walkthrough experience next to the Haunted Mansion, a surreal collection of sentient objects and psychic phenomena. It was part art exhibit, part fever dream, part something you shouldn't show kids. Walt loved the ambition, but he died before it was built, and without him, the museum lost its champion. It never got made, but pieces of it survived, tucked inside the Haunted Mansion or recycled into something else entirely. Which is kind of perfect, right? Because the weird doesn't always need its own ride. Sometimes it just haunts the edges of the one you already built. Without Walt, Disney's appetite for the truly strange began to shrink. The Haunted Mansion opened, the Museum of the Weird was shelved, and slowly but surely, the chaos that Rolly thrived on faded into careful order. And as that chaos faded, Rolly found himself drifting further from the center of it all. When Walt Disney died in 1966, the creative heartbeat at Disney seemed to falter. Not stop, but it changed, subtly and irreversibly. The chaos that Rolly thrived on depended entirely on Walt's appetite for risk. And without Walt, there was simply less room for risks. Rolly didn't disappear overnight. He stayed, he kept working, but he could feel the difference immediately. Where he once had total creative freedom, he now found guardrails. The work got smaller, the ideas safer. It wasn't rejection, at least not outright, but it was worse. It was quiet, gradual, an unspoken shift from go crazy Rolly to be careful Rolly. In the years after Walt, the kingdom changed around Rolly, and soon enough, he knew it was time to step beyond its walls. It wasn't a loud departure, there was no argument, no public fight. Rolly simply found other places, smaller, quieter parks where his imagination could breathe again. At Knott's Berry Farm, he designed Berry Tales, a colourful, whimsical, charmingly odd. It wasn't a rebellion anymore, just pure storytelling and delight. Then came projects at Busch Gardens, and later, the ABC Wildlife Preserve, where creativity wasn't dictated by legacy or caution, but simply by what felt right. In many ways, this was Rolly at his most free. Smaller stages, sure, but fewer rules, fewer voices in the room, and fewer reasons to hold back. Leaving the kingdom meant leaving the spotlight, but for Rolly, it also meant rediscovering the quiet joy of creating something purely because he wanted to. By the late 1970s, Disney was building something bold again, Epcot. Walt's dream of a city had transformed into a permanent World's Fair driven by innovation, education, and creativity. And as Disney rediscovered ambition, they also rediscovered Rolly. Older, wiser, still filled with ideas. They didn't need the rebel this time, they needed an artist. And Rolly designed vibrant murals for the Land Pavilion and filled the wonders of life with subtle whimsy, beautifully crafted, mature, but still undeniably Rolly. It wasn't chaos anymore, it was craftsmanship. Disney had grown and so had Rolly, and now finally they both understood each other. After years of drift, Rolly's work again had a home, this time without compromise or tension. It was a quiet reunion, but meaningful. Disney had finally embraced the weirdness it once struggled to handle. So Rolly didn't chase legacy, he simply just lived, he created, he told stories. And quietly, the weirdness he championed became something bigger, it became family. His son Chris followed in his footsteps, becoming an Imagineer himself, carrying Rolly's creative DNA forward into new projects and new dreams. This wasn't about Rolly the rebel, it was Rolly the father, the mentor, the storyteller. His weirdness wasn't something to copy, it was something to build from. And in his later years away from spotlight and spectacle, Rolly simply kept sketching, telling stories and smiling often. His weirdness had found permanence in art, in parks, but mostly in people, family, friends, and the creative spirits he inspired. In 2004, decades after he first walked into Disney as a kid with weird ideas and nothing to lose, Rolly Crump became something he never expected, a Disney legend. There's something deeply ironic and beautifully perfect about this moment. The same Disney that once struggled to understand his ideas now stood applauding them. He didn't get the award because he played by the rules, but precisely because he didn't. He shaped Disney not by fitting in, but by staying wonderfully out of place. And in that moment, with that plaque, Disney wasn't just recognizing Rolly, they were quietly admitting that weirdness had become their strength. The outsider had finally become the icon. And with a gentle nod and quiet applause, Disney was saying what Rolly always knew. Sometimes the weirdest ideas are the ones most worth celebrating. Rolly passed away in 2023, but his story never ended. Not really. It's in the murals, the rides, the quiet corners of Disneyland, still whispering with a weirdness that feels timeless. Rolly's story isn't just inspirational, it's personal, because sometimes the stories we tell about us help us understand our own. When I was younger, traditional classrooms never really worked for me. I struggled to connect with conventional teaching methods. My creativity often felt more disruptive than welcome. When I found mentors who weren't afraid of chaos, who embraced creative freedom and gave me permission to think differently, I thrived. Rolly Crump experienced something similar. His ideas weren't rebellious, they were just honest. Different only seems weird when viewed through the lens of convention. True creative honesty might look reckless to someone unwilling to remove their own mask. Rolly understood this. He showed me, maybe he's showing you now, that our best ideas, the ones we need most, often emerge when we have the courage to fully embrace our authentic, unfiltered selves. And in the end, Rolly's story isn't about rides on murals, it's about courage, about carving your own path, even if all you've got is a plastic fork. So here's my question to you. What's your plastic fork? What's the idea that makes you smile when no one's watching? Because Rolly's story reminds us that the weirdest ideas are the ones we most need to chase. Be brave enough to be a little weird. Maybe, just maybe, you'll change everything. Thanks for watching, guys. If you loved this long, shoot me a comment. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, all that fun stuff. And we'll see you in the next one. Laters.